In the last video, we talked about simple reducers. Now, we also have a general purpose reduction operation that gives us more control over reducing a stream to a single value. For example, let's say we want to add up all the likes of these movies. We start off by getting a stream. Then we call the map method to map each movie to its number of likes. So here we pass a lambda, m goes to m.getLikes. Now we have a stream of integers. And this is where we call the reduce method to reduce this stream to a single value. Now, as you can see, this method is overloaded. The version we use most often is the second version where we pass a binary operator here. As I told you in the last section, a binary operator is a function that takes two values and returns a single value. Now, in this case, this binary operator is called an accumulator, and the job of this operator is to accumulate values. Let me show you how it works. So we should pass a function that takes two values. Let's call them a and b. Now, in the body of this lambda, we return a plus b. Let me explain how this works. So after the map operation, we're going to have a stream of integers like this, right? Now, this accumulator is going to be applied on the first two elements in this stream. So it will add them up and the result will be 30. Our stream will look like this. Then the accumulator is going to be applied on these two elements. So the result will be 60. So the job of this accumulator is to accumulate the values, okay? Now, look at the return type of this method. It returns an optional of integer. We'll talk about optionals in the future, but very briefly, the optional class represents an object that may or may not have a value. So the value is optional. Now, the reason this method returns an optional of integer as opposed to an integer is that sometimes we might have an empty stream. So what does it mean to accumulate values in that stream? Should we get 0? Why? We don't know. So this optional class represents an object that may or may not have a value. Now we'll store the result over here. So optional of integer. Let's call it sum. Now, if you have a value, we can get it using the get method. But if we don't have a value, this will throw an exception. To prevent that from happening, we can supply a default value. So instead of calling the get method, we call or else. And this is where we supply a default value. So if you have an empty stream, we can say the result of adding all these values will be 0. Now let's print this. So print and run. So we get 60. This is how the reduce method works. Now we can rewrite this lambda expression using a method reference. This integer class has a static method called sum that takes two integers. So here we can pass a reference to this method, integer, : sum. Or we can put the caret on the body of the lambda, press Alt and Enter, and replace lambda with method reference. There you go. Now we have another version of this method that takes two arguments. The first argument is an integer called identity. This is like an initial value that we can supply. If we supply this value, then we don't have to worry about working with an optional object. So we can pass 0 as the initial value. Now we have a compilation error because this method returns an integer object, not an optional of integer. Look, so it returns an integer. And then we can print it directly over here. So using the reduce method, we can perform general purpose reduction.